Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, back today with another episode of Thrifty Tunes. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of HBB's many collabs, this one being a bit on the more affordable side. This here is the new 7Hz x HBB Elua, a dual dynamic driver set priced at $30. In my collection, the only double dynamic driver set cheaper than this is the KZ Castor, but that uses coaxial drivers, whereas these are fully independent of each other. As I keep saying, the sort of $20 to $40 price range is getting more and more crowded these days, so let's see if the Elua can carve out a little niche for itself. Before we get started, a quick disclaimer. This particular set of the Elua was sent to me by Linsol for review. I'm not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell these if I wanted, I have gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there is potential bias besides my own personal tastes at play. Thank you very much to Linsol for sending me this set, and thank you all for your continued support. Go ahead and get going with the unboxing experience. It's pretty typical for your 7Hz budget sets. If you own either the 0 or the 02, you know exactly what you're in for. It's basically the exact same box. Open it up, the IEMs are the first thing you see. Below that, you'll get the ear tips and the cable in little baggies. The included ear tips are your typical 7Hz sort of gummy snack looking tips. There are 3 types of tips in medium and large sizes, so no smalls included in these package. The first set are these two, which are narrow bore, sort of more bullet-shaped tips. The next are these two here, the orange and the red, which are deeper mount wide bore tips, and the last two here are more sort of standard bore tips with a sort of standard shape to them. Overall, you know, this is basic packaging. It's what I expect at this price range. Would have liked to have seen a carry pouch. There are some other $30 sets at this price range with a carry pouch, but honestly, it's fine. Moving on to the cable. It's fine. It's okay. It actually reminds me a lot of the cable that comes with the Canera Celeste Rue. It's a 2-wire flat cable. It has the same sort of twist to it to give it that little bit of dimensionality. It's got the same 3.5 right angle connector with no branding on it. The chin slider here is nice and functional. It stays put where you put it, and it sort of stays put once you put some tension on it. The Y split does have some 7Hz branding and some Elua branding on it, which is kind of nice. And then you've got these 2-pin connectors here, which are angled and also see-through, and there's your indicators right there. While I do think this cable is better than the one on the 02, I don't think that this is quite as nice as the stock cables on the Truthier Gate, the SimGot EW100P, or the Moondrop Chew even. All 3 of those are cheaper than this. Also, I will point out that this is actually the second pair of Elua that Linsol sent out to me. The first pair came with a shorted cable. Basically, the right and the left IEMs were shorted to each other, and it completely ruined the frequency response. I'll post a screenshot here. So yeah, it made everything sound all wonky. Credit to Linsol, they immediately sent out not just the cable, but an entire replacement unit. But that is something that happened to me, so I would keep an eye out for that. Using another cable did fix the problem. The IEMs themselves were fine, but you know, keep an eye out on the cable. It might be a point of failure. So let's take a closer look at how these are built. The Elua here are your standard injection molded clear plastic shells. The nozzles are integrated into the lower shells and feature 7Hz's distinctive flower-shaped cloth and metal filter. I think the gold actually looks quite nice. Inside the plastic, you can see both drivers sitting there and the sound tube that connects the smaller one to the larger one. In terms of ventilation, you have a single vent above the larger driver, and I believe that's it, other than the small hole there next to the right indicator for the back volume. I did not encounter any driver flex on these or pressure buildup issues, so those 2 vents are doing their job properly. On the back, we have a sort of bean-shaped metal-looking faceplate. No additional ventilation or anything back here. It's pretty typical construction for a budget set. In fact, if you look sort of here in the side, right there, you can see a capacitor, and I believe I can make out maybe a resistor, one of those tiny serpent mouse resistors right about there. So that's how they're doing the crossovers for these drivers. I do have two small issues with the build quality on these. The first is the 2-pin connector. It's extremely tight when you're inserting the cable, and it makes cable swapping a bit of a pain, and if you twist or wiggle the connector, you can see that sort of bond here between the plastic and the connector. Air bubbles start appearing between it, and it's not exactly a sign of something that's well put together. The other thing I will say is if you're using some tips with a tighter core, as you're pulling the ear tips off like this, sometimes when you twist the IEM, you can hear the seam here creaking under the bending load of your fingers, which is never a nice sound to hear in my opinion. While my pair has been solid since I've had them, I would be a bit more careful or ginger with these if you have them. And while I haven't seen any fail yet, I think that the plastic around the connector will probably end up being a weak point. So let's go ahead and pull up the specifications on these. As I said earlier, this is a dual dynamic driver set. They're both LCP diaphragms. You've got a 10mm dynamic and an 8mm dynamic. They are crossed over. One of them is wired to be full range, and the other one has a tantalum capacitor and a resistor forming a crossover to restrict the range for the other one. I cannot tell just by looking through the sides of the shells which one is full range and which one is crossed over, but that's how I believe that these are wired. I'd have to take these apart and see exactly how they work, but that's what I'm assuming as of right now. The rest of the specifications really aren't anything special. Even though these are dual dynamic drivers, they're actually quite easy to drive. They've got low impedance and high sensitivity, so you shouldn't need a dongle DAC on these. They ran easily out of tablets, phones, whatever I threw at them. The nozzle is a bit on the larger side, but it doesn't quite get to my 6.5mm big nozzle trigger zone. So yeah, overall I would say pretty standard for a budget set. It just has an extra dynamic driver in it. Moving on to the cool wall. Clear plastic 90s electronics look aside, there isn't really much to say about the looks on these. The faceplates are honestly rather featureless with the 7Hz and Elua branding on them. I know HBB specifically asked not to have his logo on these, but I would have liked to have seen some differentiation between the right and left shells, besides the overall shape. You know me, I like it when the shells look different. The gold nozzle filters on these are kind of cool, but once you put ear tips on and they're in your ears, no one will really ever see them. Overall, it's a very minimalistic and boring design. These are going to end up in bland. I just don't think there's a whole lot to look at, and they're not very exciting. And because they're not very exciting, I'm not expecting these to do too hot with the Council of Ladies, but let's go ahead and check in. It's not an auspicious start. We've got 3 mehs, a no, and a yes, so let's call that a split verdict. As far as compliments go, it's going to be 0 and 5 for the Elua, so don't expect people to mention these if you're wearing them out and about. Finally, let's move on to their thoughts. It's giving the ladies boring vibes, saying that it looks good but doesn't stand out, and again with the 90s see-through aesthetic. Overall, not a fantastic showing, but looks aren't everything. Moving on to comfort, the Elua don't reinvent the wheel in terms of shell design. They're your sort of basic bean shape, which honestly works pretty good. There's no sharp edges or protrusions here. They're very lightweight. I would say as long as this shape fits into your ear decently well, comfort should be good. I was able to wear these for long periods with no real discomfort. These worked rather well for me. They did not work well for my wife, however. Something about the cable and the angle of the nozzle meant that while she could form a seal with her ear tips, the instant she smiled or talked or laughed, the seal sort of broke down. Something about the way the shape of the nozzle interacted with her ear as she was moving her mouth just did not end up working for her. So yeah, these failed the tiny ears test surprisingly, I would say. So let's get into how these sound. The Elua is an HBB collab, so that being, the case, you would expect a bit of a bass boost or some sort of low-end emphasis on these, and that is 100% the case here. This, to me, feels like a bit of a full-on bass headset. Jacksami's remix of Rafaela Cara's Pedro has what I would call smile-making bass, especially once the chorus gets going. It's pretty fun. There's a kick drum and a bass drop here, and they're both balanced pretty well in this set. There's no sense that all the focus is sub bass or mid bass like you cannot get on some sets, where all the energies in the mid bass but not the sub bass, or all the energies in the sub bass but not the mid bass. It's good balance here. The bass guitar and kick drums are pretty good on this set. Yes's Roundabout has that iconic bass line going, and it just sounds super rich and prominent on the Elua. The kick drum has good impact. It's a really great replay as far as those two instruments go. Overall, the bass is extremely boosted, but it has pretty decent quality to go along with the quantity. The rumble and texture are good for the price range, and I feel like this is a good bass head amount of bass. As you would expect from a heavy bass head set that doesn't really tuck in the mid bass, the mids here are warmed up. But again, I think some people prefer that sort of coloration. You know, it's not all bad. Kurt Cobain's vocals in Nirvana's In Bloom, for example. I've used this example before, but the lower gravelly vocals in that track are quite helped by the sort of darker, warmer tonality that's imparted by the mid bass boost. The instruments here are pretty easily separated, and I feel like they don't step on each other or cause any masking. What I will say is that the distortion on the guitars seems a little dominant in the tonality, but I'll get into that a little bit later in the upper mids and treble. Female vocals are another sort of interesting case. I would expect them to be impacted by the bass boost, and there is a tiny bit of huskiness that comes through, but honestly, I kind of had to go looking for it. Bananarama's Venus, for example, had a surprisingly clear and coherent vocal presentation. The vocals don't have the focus or impact that they tend to have on a more vocal-forward set, but the side effect of that is that the vocals actually come off pretty clear. It reminds me of what some sets do when they recess the mid-bass to make the mid-range clear. This feels like they're pushing the vocals back just a little bit to give the vocals a bit of a sense of clarity overall, you know, harmonics included. It kind of works. The mid-range overall is warmed up, but the tonal penalties for the sub or mid-bass boost actually aren't all that severe, which I feel is a good achievement for a bass headset. So you would expect the upper mids and treble to be, you know, really subdued in a typical bass headset, but the Elua actually boosts the upper mids and treble by a pretty decent amount. It isn't to the point where it becomes sibilant or piercing or fatiguing, but there's clearly some extra energy and emphasis going on up here, and it lends to some crispy, sparkly tonality for some songs. I'm actually going to bring back the two songs that I just talked about in the mid-range section because I think they illustrate, you know, the interesting things that I was sort of leading on about. We'll go ahead and start with Venus by Bananarama. As I said, the fundamentals on the female vocals are pushed back but clear. And when you combine that with the very strong harmonic presence up here, you get an interesting female vocal sense of sort of clarity. It makes them sparkly, but not overwhelming, if that makes any sense. The echo, the reverb, the sustained notes, and the vibrato from Venus all add kind of like a shiny focus to the vocals that would otherwise sound sort of muted if it wasn't there. It's a very interesting choice in tuning, and I think it sort of works, if I'm honest. The extra emphasis up here also has an interesting effect on percussion harmonics and the distortion effects on guitars that I mentioned earlier. The wash on the crash cymbals in Nirvana's In Bloom is quite prominent in this replay. It's not what I would call sibilant or harsh, but it is quite prominent. As for the guitars, the distortion effects are also very prominent, which for this song, honestly, I think it kind of adds to the grunginess vibe, in my opinion. You know, it's suitable. I will say none of this is what I would call natural or neutral tonality by any means. It's very, very colored, and it won't work great for all music. I do, however, think that the extra energy is handled well. It's not, like I said, fatiguing or piercing. It does add some balance to what would normally be a very, very bass-heavy tuning. As far as technicalities go, this is a bass headset, so I expect it to excel in low frequencies, and honestly, it does. The droning undertones and the subtones that are produced by the Who's throat singing in Sugan Esena, they have the tonality, the accuracy, the rumbliness that I would expect from a set with really great low-end resolution, and the Elua comes through. As we move up the range, the mids, like I said, are a bit underemphasized. I lose a little bit of the detail that I'm looking for, but the top-end detail is quite nice, as I mentioned. The Osborne Brothers Rocky Top has those great finger slides, the picking detail on the strings, and I feel the Elua renders all of that pretty well. This is not a technical marvel by any means, and I feel like the tuning is hiding some of the detail that I feel these drivers might be capable of, but I don't think it's straight up bad in terms of detail resolution. If I had to compare it with other dual dynamic driver sets, I would put it between the KZ Castor Pro Bass Edition and the Aoshida E20, but it's closer to the Castor than it is to the E20. When it comes to stereo separation, the Elua actually does quite well. Mediterranean Sundance sounds nice and separated here. Paco and Al have their own space in each ear. They don't encroach on each other. Audience has its own area in the middle. It's not what I would say the widest stereo separation, but it's also not claustrophobic in any way. In terms of perceived 3D soundstage, it's fine. It won't hold back well-mastered tracks, but it also won't enhance them in any way. Dave Brubeck's Take 5 lets me place all the instruments around me, but I don't feel like the set is pushing them out or expanding the stage in any way. It also, however, isn't contracting that spatial information down in any way. So overall, I would say the Elua winds up being average in both stereo separation and perceived 3D soundstage for sets at, this price range. All right, let's get into the comparison section. The Elua here is what I would call a full-fat bass head tuning, but it's got some sparkle up top to sort of even things out a little bit, but it's still very bass dominant in the tuning. It's got more bass than warmer sets like the QKZX HBB or the Blonde Z300, and it's got a bassier, more relaxed sound than something like the 7Hz 02 or the Moondrop Chew. It's not quite as energetic in the treble as those. And it definitely isn't a bright IEM like the Libra X or the Zero. So seeing as this is a bass headset, I'm going to compare these to the rest of my bass headsets sort of in this price range-ish, so let's go ahead and get going. First up, we have a budget bass head classic, the KBEar Rosefinch, priced at $20 US. Right off the bat, the Rosefinch has more mid-bass punch than the Elua does, and that's going to be a bit of a trend. While these two are sort of similar in terms of overall sub-bass rumble, the Rosefinch comes across as overall bassier. Where the Elua wins is in the tonality, in the mid-range, and the highs. The Rosefinch has rather recessed mids, whereas the Elua's instruments are still relatively clear and easily separable. In terms of vocals, the Elua is more forward with the harmonics and is definitely the brighter of the two, but that doesn't make it fatiguing. Of these two, I actually find the Elua to be the clearer sounding of the two, and the extra brightness gives it some bonus excitement up at the top of the range. If all you want is pure mid-bass punching power and thumpiness, then the Rosefinch is the way to go here. But if you're looking for a more balanced bass head IEM, the Elua is a great option. Next up, in my opinion, the most budget-friendly way to get into a bass headset tuning, it is the KZ Castor, specifically the Bass Boosted Edition. MSRP of $25, but as we all know, regularly found for much, much less than that. I'm going to be talking specifically about the up, up, down, down switch configuration here, since that is the bass head configuration. Like the Rosefinch, the Castor bass provides just a bit more mid-bass punch and thump, I feel, than the Elua does. This time, however, the Elua does win out in terms of sub-bass rumble, and I would say that the overall bass texture is better on the Elua than on the Castor bass. I also prefer the mids on the Elua. They just have a bit more body and presence than the sort of leaner, more Harmon-ish mids on the Castor. I will say though, if you do prefer that leaner, cleaner Harmon-style mid-range, the Castor will be your preference here. As far as vocals and treble goes, the Castor is the more vocal forward of the two, but again, it's lacking a bit of that bonus sparkle that the Elua has. Overall, the Castor, especially on sale, is probably still the better value because I think it can regularly be found for less than like $10. But the Elua wins in overall sound quality, at least to my ears. Finally, we'll take a big leap up in price and talk about the QKZX HBB Hades. And like I said, yet again, the Elua is going to lose the battle of mid-range or mid-bass punch to the Hades. Surprisingly, I think the Elua has better sub-bass rumble and overall bass texture compared to the Hades, which is interesting considering the prices of these two. The vocal presentation on these is surprisingly similar. You can sort of tell that these two were tuned by the same guy. I mean, it makes sense. they both have a bit of a harmonic focus versus the vocal fundamental focus. The treble, however, is completely different. The extra shine, sparkle, and sort of zest that the Elua has makes the Hades seem basically non-existent as far as treble sparkle goes. Overall, the Elua is, in my opinion, the more balanced, more refined bass head tuning when compared to the Hades. The Hades is not what you want if you're going to be looking for clear, resolving sound. The Hades is what I would charitably describe as just stupid, bassy fun. So, quick sum up. If what you want is mid-bass punch, if all you care about is that mid-bass thumpiness, the Elua loses to basically everything here. That being said, the Elua is also the brightest, most well-balanced set here. Some folks really won't like that extra sparkle and shine in the treble. They'll prefer the more laid-back treble presentation on the Rosefinch or the Hades. And if you don't want that, that's perfectly fine. The Castor Bass is still slightly sparkly. It's much more affordable. The Rosefinch is also much more affordable, and it will give you that warmer, treble light sound signature that you're looking for. But if you're looking for something different from these three in the world of bass headsets, if you want something with a bit more sparkle to it, I think the Elua might be worth looking into. All right, but let's get these out of the way, and we'll go ahead and break down the Elua and figure out where it goes on the AudioAmigo Arbitrary rating scale. Go ahead and start off with the not so good. The cable is not great, and I had one basically show up dead on arrival. The shells feel a little low rent for a $30 IEM. The KZ Castor is actually better built than these. And the creaking and the movement of the socket that I have leads me to question the durability on these long term. This is a different take on the sort of bass head sound signature. It's more of a sort of deep V-ish shape, but somehow the mids aren't recessed. Rather than an overcooked warm signature, it's more U-shaped, I would say. It's balanced. It will definitely draw some people to something more bass heady in tuning who want a bit of extra treble sparkle. I personally think it's a good sounding IEM. It's kind of in a price vacuum as far as the bass headsets that I have tried go. It's between 30 and $50. I really haven't heard a true bass headset outside of maybe the Hades. And I do feel like the Elua might be a tad bit overpriced compared to what I think is its main competition here. Yeah, when the main competition can be found regularly for $15 or under on AliExpress, it's not a super good look for the Elua when they're asking twice as much money. All of that taken into account, I'm going to put the Elua in But I Like This. I feel like it's a good IEM. It works for me personally, and the people who like it will really dig the more balanced presentation and the sort of different take on the bass head sound. I will say it's already a niche tuning because it's a bass headset, and it's sort of a subset of a niche tuning in that it's a brighter bass headset. For $30, I think it's honestly just a fun way to listen to some bassier tracks, but if you're on a budget, there are better values out there. So, do I recommend the 7Hz X HBB Elua? I do, but not necessarily for everybody. This set is not for people who want a neutral or natural sounding sound signature. It isn't for treble heads, and it's not for people who love, lush, warm, mid-range detail. It also isn't for people who want that pure vocal-focused set. This is for bass heads. And it's for bass heads who want to try something with a little bit of extra sparkle in their treble to give extra sense of clarity and excitement to their listening experience. I would say if you already have the Rosefinch or the Castor Bass, this might be a good buy if you want to try out that sort of slightly sparklier bass head signature. Just don't go into this expecting a total upgrade. This is more of a different flavor of a food that you already love. I personally like it, and I think some of you out there will as well, but I also think that this won't exactly be for everybody. But that's going to wrap this one up. Not a bad little bass headset. I think it's pretty well done, all things considered. I don't think all bass heads will dig it due to that extra sparkliness in the treble, but like I said, I think it works well for me. Something different from HBB, which I think is nice to see. I just wish the build quality was a bit nicer and the cable was nicer. This is a $30 set. Yeah, just I wish that maybe a little better. It would have probably moved up to this is brilliant. But that's going to do it for the moment. I appreciate all your continued support. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.